Okay, we're recording. So this will be around why we were excited for this language and the reasoning behind it. So, what's in it for you in this talk? We would basically get you hungry to learn or try out Elixir, at least in your spare time. Hungry enough, hopefully. And also, we would show you some awesome cool features that are very unique to Elixir. Guess which language this is?
Ruby.
So, what is so cool about Ruby? It's pure joy. And so it brings in the human element of programming. Even Mags, the person who created Ruby, always talked about the joy of programming and how, like we talk about the joy in interviewing. So around the joy, so what he says is programs serve us humans. So they should be very human in nature. For example, to give you one small example, are like, for example, error codes, right? So I'll show you one error code from Scala. So if you misspell printing hello world, it says error not found, value println. And like, okay, so what? What should I do about this? Now Ruby does this better. So if I misspell print and I write print, it says, you mean print? So that way it's very human and it tells you what to do. The errors are actionable and not just like, oh, I blew up, now take care of it. I don't know. So that way Ruby brings in that joy of programming. That's why Ruby people are so attached to the language and in love with it. Okay. So that's Ruby. What do you think is like common in all these three images that you see here?
Hello.
Hi,
Sorry. Yeah.
Scaling.
Yeah, you're right. So really, you can just imagine the amount of subscribers. Even now 4G is on that. And that is also related with scale, and that's WhatsApp. And then RabbitMQ is like a message to me. So one, that has a lot of scale. You can just imagine the amount of users that are being served using this. And also, have you ever heard your 4G or your 3G networks like completely going down, a whole blackout, even in case of WhatsApp, except for the one case when they merged with Facebook and they were doing some nasty things there, so that's why it blew up. But apart from that, the outages are very few, right? So how is this all possible? It is possible because of this other common thing between these three things, which is Erlang. So Erlang was brought in I think 25 years ago. Yeah, maybe 25 years ago, by Ericsson. There's this person called Joe Armstrong who started working on Erlang because they wanted to have a language that they can write their telephonic systems in. And why do they need to do that? Because at that time there were phones, there were more phones, there were like a lot of phones. So when there are a lot of phones, you have this whole switch systems. If you have studied about them or read about them, you need this whole switching mechanism so that calls can be connected from one telephone to the other. So all these switching systems were programmed in this particular language called Erlang, which had the capability of managing this kind of scale, this kind of traffic. And have you seen telephone systems failing? That's very few, right? So they handled. So at that time, when we never even thought about microservices, if you see and connect it back, the problems that we're facing now with microservices and scale was solved like 25, 30 years ago. Like, wow, right? And things like, distributed patterns, like fault tolerance, having almost like a real-time data passing or message passing, even this being highly available. It is a highly available service. And also this whole idea of, say they have to make a code change, right, on one of their routers or switching devices. You don't have to like switch off the whole network and then you can't say, oh, we'll be down for like 2 to 4 a.m. And all of this could happen because it also has this feature of hot swapping. So you can like swap in code in production and things would just work fine. And it has all of these patterns built into the system. You don't have to rediscover them or build external libraries on it and everything. It all comes baked into the system. So that's Erlang. Guess who this person is?
Mission Ritchie.
No, that's Rich Hickey. Yeah, exactly. That's Rich Hickey, and you know what's cool about him? He's always right. Okay, so you need to watch a bunch of his videos where he talks about the importance of functional programming as such in general, and actually he trolls object-oriented programming. I would say that.
I would say he talks more about programming.
Yeah, in general.
In general, just look at there is one video which talks more about values,
Yeah.
which I watched. So it's this general in terms of programming. It's not about whether you are object programming or whatever you're doing. It's general in terms of programming.
Yeah, but yeah. The underpinning being what practices we are following and what is right or wrong about it, and how things have changed, and yeah, that's the whole idea around it. So, how is this guy related? He made this language called Clojure, which has this cool Lisp-like interface, and it does pattern matching. It's backed by a JVM, and you can like write your own constructs or macros inside of that. So everything like if or even a do or things like that are implemented as macros inside of the system. So you don't basically say that so if is a special keyword in most of the languages. It has to be implemented by the program writers. Here, it's implemented in such a way that you can swap out that if and put in your own if. I'm just giving you an example. It's not suggested to do that. But the whole idea being, you don't have to wait for features in your programming language. You just create it. So the talk is about Elixir, and we're talking about different languages, not Elixir. So if you think about all these three languages, they have a lot of goodness attached to it. But the world, anything is not just good, right? It has its own problems. For example, Ruby. Ruby might be very beautiful to write and very nice, but it sucks at performance. We know that. And when it comes to scale, it doesn't scale. That's the idea. And then Erlang is extremely powerful, we know that, but its syntax is like, you would not want to go out and write code. Even looking at the syntax is like crazy. You should look at it and validate what I'm saying. And also with Clojure comes the whole idea of non-familiarity. Like most of the people do not understand Lisp-like syntax. It takes a while to grasp that kind of syntax and change your thinking, the way you program, think about your program, all has to change. So that's also one problem. And also, have you people seen Clojure's stack trace? It's crazy. So that's something you should also look at and see. These are the problems that exist with these languages. Elixir tries to address all of this. So there's this guy called Jose Valim, who's the creator of Elixir. And you add these 4 elements together, call them an element, sorry. You get Elixir. Yeah. So that's how Elixir is created, the whole. So Elixir basically means magic potion. So this is how you create your magic potion, he being the wizard. And yeah, so that's Elixir for you. Why is Elixir awesome?
Yeah. Coming to why Elixir is awesome. Actually, Rahul already told, as this Elixir came from Ruby, Erlang, and Clojure. Ruby is very pure, like whenever error messages are there, it won't it will tell clearly what are the other actionable. As Elixir came from Ruby, whenever, as I think you all people worked on JavaScript and Java, right? Whenever you saw the error messages, there will be the error actually, but it won't tell what are the next action that we need to take care of. Coming to Elixir error messages, it will be clear. Okay, I think for example, if you want to print on the console and to run that while you typed io.put, but actually puts is the method which will prints on the console actually. Then it will clearly says, I think did you mean of puts? It will clearly explain. Not only that, if there are any actionable items that need to be taken to as part of solving that, That will also clearly mention. Coming to the second error, we will come through it while we do the live demo. And then it's functional actually.
Yeah. So it is functional. It has like all of the features of a functional language. It is. It has like. The functions are a first-class citizen. You can do that whole function composition that you might have seen that pattern. So you can do that. It has the syntactic sugar for that. It has closures. So you can do closures like just if you know JavaScript, you would know this. Like that's the most common functional thing you can do. Higher order functions, that is also supported. Pattern matching and the immutability concept, that's also there. But then you would say, why is functional awesome? Like, why even should I do functional? So there's this whole idea on OOPS, right? Object-oriented, that it's cool because you can relate to it. It's very real. So this whole things around classes and objects, that you can relate it to real life objects and blah blah blah. But yes, I agree. It's very simple. It makes sense. But we actually end up with this when we write our apps, because it's a mess at the end. And the alternative right now we have is functional programming, where all of this mess can be brought into order. This whole chaos can be brought into one place. This whole problem of inheritance and errors bubbling up the whole trace and blowing your whole application up. That all can be addressed using concepts and functional programming. Yeah, it has a standard toolset, Ansha.
Yeah, it comes up with a standard toolset. Like whenever we want to write a project, we want to add the test framework and we need to do all those things. But coming to Elixir, it comes up with as part of creating the project itself, it comes up with the build tools, build test framework and package manager itself. So the productivity is right from the beginning. And also,
so to add on to that, the whole idea is that we tend to, when you start learning a language, you look at the language like, what build tool should I use? What kind of package management should I use? So this decisions while you're learning is not a good thing, because you are not actually learning the language, but instead you are into this whole decision making on what to use and what not to use. So that is taken care of by the language itself. It comes baked with the build tools, the package manager, the test framework and everything. So it kind of it takes away the cognitive load of deciding these things. Instead it focuses on get my job done. That's what you're here for, and you want to code.
And also it is awesome in regarding to the documentation itself. Actually what Elixir people are feeling like, whenever you come up with a new feature and if the people are reading documentation about that feature and they are not clear about that, Elixir people will treat like that it is a bug. Why? Because coming to Elixir documentation, there will be unit testing for the documentation itself. So whenever the new feature comes up, documentation for that part will also be clear. And also, not only that, we have it scales like awesome. For that, I can say this, it has a box with 128 GB RAM that can support around 2 million connections. Imagine this on a Gen server, Java server, or else on a Ruby server, how difficult it is. Not only that,
and when she says 2 million connections, these are 2 million concurrent connections. Like 2 million people connected to your server at once. That's crazy.
We can come up with an example by using WhatsApp itself. And to maintain that WhatsApp, we just only about 10 engineers are maintaining that WhatsApp. From this statement itself, we are really clear about how much regarding it says infra cost and also dev cost.
Developer cost, which is like the major chunk of your product, developer cost.
I thought WhatsApp was using Erlang, not Elixir, right?
Yeah, it's Erlang basically. Yeah. Elixir is just being the interface. Yeah, correct.
Let's do some live coding. I'm actually first for this live coding. If any mistake has happened, please bear with me.
Yeah, we'll basically she'll run this whole. So this partial BBQ is like an opposite of absolute knowledge, and so she'll like create a restaurant from which you can order food, so like a simple application, so that you get a feel of how it would feel if you would code it.
So as to run Elixir projects in your laptop, we just need to install Elixir with the help of Brew. Like Brew install Elixir.
Just zoom in a little. Oops. Yes, no.
Command plus plus.
Oh, that works. Your command, did you remap it?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
good.
use the project directly.
Good.
So as to run Elixir projects in you just need to install it by using Brew. Brew install Elixir will give whatever whatever the things that you need to run Elixir projects in it. Okay, let's create some partial barbecue service in which we will have some menu, and let's order that thing. As you people are feeling hungry now. Okay, here I told you, right? I will show one error for you as part of live coding. See here. Application name must start with lowercase ASCII letters followed. It's clearly saying that all over the letters in the project name needs to be in a small letters. That's why it's showing. This how happens.
I care about my application. I shouldn't care about my application name. It's okay, but
I cannot answer that question.
But say you can actually remove this warning. If you explicitly name the application, then you can use it. That's the session thing.
And also see, whenever we create the project, it's clear what are the next steps that developer needs to take care of, like changing the directory to the partial BBQ service, and then run. As I told, it comes up with a standard tool set, like with the test frameworks and everything, which we need not to take care of installing the test framework again. It come up with a default like test framework, so that we can run the test by just running mix test. Okay, let's write some code now. This is the project structure, like build, as you people all know about that, and live, in which the coding related part will come, like source file will go comes under it, and the test, in which test will go. Okay, let's start writing code. For now, I am creating. As this is a BBQ service, it needs to have some menu, right? So that people can order. For that, I am using the hash map. Tell me some few items in BBQ. Biryani. Okay. Okay. It's very cheap in my service. What else?
You missed. Okay, it's a comma.
Non-veg.
So is it $10 or 10 rupees?
10 rupees.
Okay.
It's very cheap. Chicken. Okay.
You missed an hour. Good.
Okay. Let's see whether our BBQ service is giving the menu or not. So as to run our code, actually Elixir giving the REPL. In Java, Java people told that they will give REPL in Java 9 version in around 2016 itself, but still not yet implemented. In Elixir, we have that. Java.
JavaScript?
Java.
What is the right for this?
No, Java.
Java.
JavaScript.
Java has online thing done by other people.
Yeah.
That is unofficial Java.
Yeah.
This is the REPL in which we can write whatever we want. Like, if you want to know anything about the string, it will clearly say what is that mean. Term for is the data type bit string and what is that byte size. If you want to get help, everything we can do like this. Like a Python, we have to command on something. It will work like that. Okay, now let's compile our service. It needs to be capital because that class name is.
Huh?
Like too much info.
Oh shit! Wait.
Probably.
I will need to buy new one for it.
We already have two monitors. What was it?
Oh, good. We compiled it. Okay, let's see what is there in our menu. Do you people want to order that? Okay, let's try. No?
No.
No.
Okay. Sorry. Please bear with me.
Chill. No worries.
I'm getting tension now. Okay, let's order item with name. So that if the ordered item is not there, first we have to map to get that menu with the name. Such as if the item is not there, it will say.
You can just say name. You can just say error and then a string.
Fine.
That should be fine.
Nulls are first class here.
Not nulls. Yeah, I know.
No such item. If that is there. Okay, this item is there, and let's say enjoy. Let's send the message saying, okay, you enjoy this biryani with the less cost. Okay, let's compile this. I don't know what it happens. It's called.
Syntax. Oh my god. Go back. Line number 10.
Case statement is written expression.
What?
The case statement has a comma. Look at line number 10.
Line number 10.
You see our live journey.
Yeah.
I think it's still here.
The last,
Last
comma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
God, please. Thanks. Okay.
Not God.
Okay.
Jose.
You want to order now? Okay, we compile it, right?
They'll say no.
No,
Just go ahead.
you don't want biryani
No.
and chicken.
Chill. We need more food. We did not have lunch at the shop.
Yeah, we want. Menu is this. Okay, let's order.
Yeah.
Let's order for oranges. Oh no, I went to BBQ and I am ordering oranges. It's saying no such item. Let's see for biryani. Yes. Wow, nice. We got biryani. We can have it. I ate it. You just ate now? Okay.
Cool.
This one, like,
Cool. So this was about like a small like how would you write a general Elixir service. We'll get like deep dive right now in some like
Slide number 30.
sorry.
sharing.
Slide number is telling.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so partial BBQs is done. Okay, so how does this all work? Like, how does this Elixir thing basically work? So we'll deep dive into that. It runs on the Erlang VM, so we'll see how that actually functions. It starts off basically, we can think of it, like, just think about a process. What's a process? A process is this entity where you run your program like in a sequential manner. So this being an Erlang process would have this sequential code. Think about it like that, and there is no concurrency inside of it. Like, it's pure. It has no concurrency inside of it, and you can do like basic programming functions like loops. You can do if-elses, and make function calls and blah blah blah. Basic stuff. No concurrency magic inside of this. Now you take that process, and since now you want to do concurrency, you have these multiple processes living inside that you would want to create, and so they will have their own execution flows, like it's shown here, and they would have their own memory space as well. So their own stack, their own heap, and then their own garbage collector as well for that particular single process. And the way processes would typically talk to each other would be via messaging, which is a very gentle pattern. And there's no HTTP protocol as such, no serialization, no deserialization, anything going on. It is supported by the Beam runtime itself. So this whole message passing. So how does this all show up? So right now, when you run a Elixir process, it runs up as one single process on the operating system. That's the Beam VM running together. Now this Beam VM, these blue boxes that you see are individual processes that you're running inside the Beam VM. And they have they have this scheduler attached for every core, every CPU core that you have. What the job of the scheduler is like a manager. It would just pull in processes and allot them time and like that, you run on CPU right now, then next to you. So basically scheduling happens in the scheduler. Like, this whole idea is pretty straightforward, not like rocket science. Of course, the algos behind it are complex, but we don't have to worry about it. It's abstracted out. And this is how it is able to create so many processes. And this, so I think there's a limit of around 1.3 million processes that you can run inside the VM. That's the limit.
These will not be your usual OS level processes.
No.
VM processes. A bad analogy is JVM threads, but
No, not
it's a
threads.
bad analogy because each process is basically only one actor.
Yeah.
And it's not really a process.
It's not really
nothing
process.
like
Exactly.
OS.
It's so light, it's probably even lesser than 1 KB, and it's very easily creatable and destroyable. So whole idea with threads and processes, they're costly to make, right? It's not. You can just bring it up. In fact, there is a video you should watch. I'll share the links later, where the person springs up like 10,000 running processes, and they're doing some real job, not some sleep or anything. Like, and they spring up in like a second or two, like 10,000 processes all together. So just imagine the kind of speed you get out of this. Also in booting up bootstrapping your computer, that JVM takes a while to warm up and blah, blah, blah. So you don't have that kind of a headache, is what my understanding is from that. Yeah.
It's more similar to how JavaScript brings your, I will not say concurrency though, but your asynchronous programming.
The loop you're saying?
Yeah, loop kind of. Here I would take similar analogy, but here instead of that being only a simple lambda or a simple function, here you might have more related to this process, more attached to that process maybe.
I cannot compare it to JavaScript well because
Actually, these two are orthogonal. Like, you can run an event loop within each process if you want. So, Akka kind of does that in some cases. So these are like independent processes which send messages to each other, and each one is allocated CPU time based on its need, and each one maintains its own message box so that it can keep a queue of what tasks it should do and all that. So it's the actor model. The actor model and event loop are completely different concurrency constructs.
I kind of see little confused faces. I will explain why we even need to do this. So what happens is that when you do object-oriented programming, you're basically creating objects in memory, right? And when you create objects in memory, you have different classes and having methods that probably go and manipulate that particular memory, like object memory there. So when that manipulation happens, there are problems where there are race conditions where you're actually running two different functions and two different threads. Say you're multi-threaded and you're running it. It's going and probably changing the same piece of data. So it might result in a very inefficient return values or whatever. Inconsistency. It's not reliable. It's not consistent. So such problems can be eliminated when you do not have anything in memory at all. So instead of having something in memory and saying, like I am going and changing something there, these things are self-contained, these processes, they run on their own. They are individual entities, like he said, actor model. So each one is an actor, which can perform certain actions and special actions, but they are self-contained, they don't do anything. So if they have to do something with something else, they pass it out as a copy of that. So it's like a message, like just humans talking to each other, right? Each of you has a different view of the world. So same way, these actors, every process has a different view of the world, instead of all looking at the same board and trying to change things there. So a lot of languages like Python and Ruby solve this problem by using something called GIL, Global Interpreter Lock. What it does is they pause a thread saying, okay, world pause, I need to make a change. So they make a change, come back, then the next process is given control to it, then that makes a change, comes back. So that way consistency is achieved, but then you lose performance. So to achieve performance in spite of, and also gain consistency, this is one model of running your application. So does that make sense? If not, then I can.
I'll put it in a different way. So to mostly object-oriented people, this is easier to understand. So think of each actor as an object which holds state, and its state can be modified only by itself, but not by anybody else. It's like its state is completely private, and so there is no free-floating state anywhere. Every state is assigned to some actor, and actors communicate with each other by using messages and storing them in mailboxes, maintaining queue and all that. So as they process their messages, they keep modifying their own internal state, but they have no permission to modify any other actor state, which is very much different from object-oriented programming, where you can go and do object.state.modify. You can do that. Here you can't. So that's what gives you very high level of concurrency without doing like shared notable state.
We kind of have not hit those problems yet practically, so I think imagining that is also a little difficult for people. Maybe we'll make another attempt at that on a different session. I think it makes sense. We should do that. Okay, so this is other concept called supervisors in Elixir or Erlang. This whole idea is around fault tolerance. So right now with microservices, you have this whole problem of if my microservice fails, there's a dependent other microservice, there's a cascading failure, right? Everything starts failing. So all of that, such problems can be addressed using this model. And to break it out to you, it's as simple as saying, oh, my laptop's not working. So what does the ops guy tell you? Restart your computer, it should start working. This is exactly the same concept. So what happens basically is, so you have this, so every process is like a worker supervised by a supervisor. So it's this whole hierarchical structure. And if say that okay, I can use a mouse because people are on the call. So if there is this particular worker that fails, all you have to do is remove that worker and replace it with a new one. And the system won't break. So you can see the kind of fault tolerance that is coming into place. There's no cascading failures. Like if there is a failure, it gets replaced. So it doesn't flow through the whole thing and bring your system down.
Doesn't get into a loop. Maybe there is a logical reasoning and keeps on failing and keep on replacing it.
So if there is, if it keeps on replacing, then there's a problem with your code there. That needs fixing. That anyways needs fixing. But here is for cases that you have not probably handled. There is a one-off case. It's like a runtime error, and a simple restart would fix it. That's where it becomes, and that is a very general case.
What is this actually entity? What component is it?
And what I'm explaining is a supervisor. The worker is being processes.
Supervisor is also a process.
Supervisor is also a process.
The VM only understands process.
Yeah. So, but it has some special meaning for the VM. It treats it in a different term. Yeah. So basically, this would to give you more detail on this. So just imagine you creating a Java microservice, and the operations people, or if you're owning the whole infrastructure, then you have this whole headache and overhead of how will I monitor my JVM when it is failing? What should I do when there is a certain exception? And handle all of that. So all that burden is taken off. So right now, if something of this sort happens, a report goes into your log, there's an error, but the system doesn't come down. So you're not called up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. at night and you're I need to fix this, because everybody loves that, right? So that's what this kind of a pattern solves. And this comes baked in the Beam VM and the Erlang VM. Yeah, so there is this book called Elixir in Action. That is one of the books that I would recommend people read, at least to get an idea of a different world on how things work there. So this person had this whole setup in their company where they used different technologies to address different problems. So they wanted a HTTP server, they used Nginx Fusion. They wanted to request processing, they used Rails there. For long-running requests, they used Go, then there was Redis. So there's this whole myriad of technologies that was running the whole stack, which is a general case right now, if you see. We all do that in our projects. We have huge technology, and we're super proud about it also. Like, oh my God, we use this. And so this was all done to address their concurrency needs. This whole pattern was brought in so that, their systems work like in situations of high load. Now imagine
There will be 7 teams maintaining those.
yeah, and 17 maintaining the cost of the development team as well. Just imagine now a junior or even a newbie coming into your company or a team, and that person trying to get a hold of all of this. And just imagine the time of upscale time you need, like to just get them started, or them contributing confidently into the service. Like, so the whole idea is that you have so many, you cannot solve the problem by just like probably documentation or what is that called? Pairing. But
Was it intentional?
yeah. So the way they solved it is that they used Erlang everywhere, because right now Erlang is not yet there. So they use Elixir over Erlang. It's not yet there, that the kind of library support for all of this. They built it on their own, but they're on the way to get there at that point. And they have this whole system running as a single process. And now just imagine, this language, Elixir, as the interface, and your VM. So all you're doing basically is tinkering with your VM, using Elixir as an interface. So that makes it so easy because it won't change. The way it works won't change. It's all baked into it. So sometimes, when you think about it, sometimes that independence that is cut off helps, especially if you have a need that requires concurrency. So one example would be like a sports website that wants to push in this whole sports website realm. You have to be the first sports website to push in your notification to people, okay? Or else if you're late in it, people might sign off from your feeds, like we don't want interested kind of thing. So there's this company who did this. They were on a Ruby on something, and then they were running it on 15 servers, and they were pretty slow when it comes to pushing things to their consumer subscribers. So these are all like push notifications. Push notifications means these concurrent connections, active connections living, right? And they switched to Elixir. They came down to 5 servers, and their pushing time changed like dramatically. Like they became one of the best in the industry. So that's the value they get out of Erlang.
So, is it replacing Redis and MongoDB?
Yeah, I cannot tell you that. That's what I read in there. But Redis can be RabbitMQ is probably
Redis I agree, Redis I agree, but MongoDB is something for
This is application cache, right? Basically.
Right, yeah.
So Erlang has Erlang term storage, which is inside the VM. So the VM itself maintains its own application cache. So you don't have to again hook up a Redis or anything.
And you can persist also.
Persistence is to a different database or something. So this is just the application cache.
Oh yeah, and then they actually had to what the book says is they were able to remove caches altogether. Caching is a tough problem anywhere. Like if you try to cache, to come up with your own set of rules and specific to your data, and it's a mess. And you don't need to do they stopped doing caching altogether, which was like crazy, right? So
you moved it to the VM.
yeah, exactly. So the whole idea is that so when you start up a new project, you are testing out things. There's this whole thing that you don't know whether the idea will work in the market. So you want something that can will reduce your development time. You're very quick to the market. Like you quickly develop your product. Put in your business logic, try it out. You don't want to write in systems which are like super complex and optimize for performance when you are a new company. So versus when you actually grow and you have a lot of requests, you have to change your stack. So previously, I think this was like Ruby or Django. You would write your service in Ruby and Django previously because it's very quick and you get it out in the market and then you see it works. Then you switch on to some performant language. So one example would be Twitter. We did that. So this thing comes ready with everything. It's fast to develop because Elixir has the kind of syntax that Ruby has, and it has a performance that you can scale to like 2 million requests, things like that. So when you have that kind of power in the technology you have started on with, you don't have this whole cost of moving later on. There's a one-time cost, but there is a cost to it. So you don't have to think about that. That whole it's like a win-win situation, right? You don't have to like weigh on, okay, what should I use, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to take the decision at all. Yeah, that's a sudden end to the talk.
I think very good use cases to consider are Twitter versus WhatsApp. So Twitter started as a Ruby on Rails shop, and they couldn't scale. Within 2 years, they reached a situation where they can't scale with that stack anymore, and they shifted to Scala after that. So WhatsApp started with Erlang, and even when they were like it was super popular in India and many big countries, and millions of people were using it, and their engineering team did not grow more than 30. I mean, 30 or 10. So they were like the number of DevOps people they had was 2 or 3, but that big of an infrastructure.
These are some use cases that like we use it for Go Places for similar reasons, because we had like 12, we need to like fetch around, we were thinking like 12, 13 websites that we need to collect data from, process it, turn it into one data structure, and then pass it on to the user. And say even one service takes 1.5 seconds to return back data, and you have to manage all of this. Just imagine like 20-25 seconds the user will be just waiting on the search page. Like, so all of that, such problems are addressed by, so each process goes, fetches it, and brings it back, so you basically kind of parallelize it. Probably comes down to like 3-4 seconds, and you get all your data, and you can probably handle it as a UX on the screen saying, loading services, like loading results, and then you start populating results one by one. So that way you can solve that problem of 4 seconds even. So that's how we were thinking to do it on Go Places. We are refactoring the app right now. I have made the repository public. I'll share that link as well, so that you can start contributing to it. It's a very good use case, I feel, to even try out Elixir. I'm also digging into what kind of open source Elixir projects that are there, which we can contribute to and learn all of this. And Ruby was interested in that we can attract more projects. So if we kind of create a community here of Elixir people and meet up and like probably just contribute to open source or solve a certain problem, I think we can build that capability here. And I see this is the next promising language or tool I see in the coming 4-5 years, which we can latch on to.
New Ruby on Rails.
The new Ruby on Rails, yeah. That's one book I would suggest that we all read. It's there in the office. You can pick it up. If you want more copies, you can get it.
What is the maturity level of Elixir?
30 years.
Are you considering it for new projects?
Yeah, we can. We obviously can, because like it's like 30 years old. Like it's patent tested. Sorry.
Isn't there in Techno?
Elixir language is 6 years old.
Yeah, the language is 6 years old, and it basically doesn't add its own nuances and stuff like for example, Clojure, right? It does its own thing also in some places with the JVM. Elixir doesn't do that. It just plain exposes of your VM.
Yeah, so Erlang syntax is unlike any syntax you have ever seen. So it's like you have to completely unlearn anything you have ever learned and learn it. And it has statements with full stops at end. And yeah, it's crazy. So Erlang is so unfriendly that even with that much of a powerful VM, people haven't tried. The best VM people have so far is JVM right now. I mean, this is even better, but people don't try it. So Elixir is this beautiful syntax on top of Erlang, which is kind of like Ruby. It's easy to approach.